Please be seated. I'll sound like a broken record. Have the jurors all followed my instructions, not talked about the case with yourselves or with anybody else or looked up to any of the people or places involved? Even if you did so inadvertently, now would be the time to raise your hand and let me know. For the record, no jurors lifted their hand. We're at a spot where we're not going to be able to get a witness in here in time before lunch, so we're going to take an early lunch. It's my fault. My apologies. So why don't we have you come back at 1 o'clock? That should give you an hour and a half. And again, don't talk about the case with anybody else or look up any of the people or places involved, and we'll see everybody then. Please be seated. I'll let both sides know that the bailiffs asked me about Mr. Wright. I told them they could send him back. I'm assuming the state won't need him again today.
No, Your Honor.
Or you have any intentions at this time to call him in the future?
We don't.
Okay, and when we get to the defense case, if you decide you are going to call him, you'll need to give the bailiffs at least some heads up so they can transport him from Charlotte.
Yes,
That's
Your Honor.
where he's at.
Okay. We have a protocol in place for transporting Mr. Wright. We need at least 24-hour notice to make it happen.
It's whatever the guys in the green jackets tell me, and so just follow. The defense can talk to them and follow whatever their procedure is. That's their deal. Okay, see everybody at 1. For the record, both assistant state attorneys are present. Both defense counsel and Mr. Sievers. State's ready.
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense is ready.
Defense is ready, Your Honor.
Bring them out. Please be seated. I'll ask our jurors again, did you follow my instructions, not talk about the case among yourselves with anybody else or look up any people or places involved? Even if you did so inadvertently, now would be the time to raise your hand and let me know. For the record, no jurors lifted their hand. Next witness.
State calls Dr. Marc Sievers.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your full name for the record, sir?
Mark, M-A-R-K, middle initial E as in Edward, Petrites, P-E-T-R-I-T-E-S, M.D.
And Mr. Petrites, what do you do for a living?
I'm a physician, surgeon,
And
a surgeon.
and are you still a practicing physician?
Presently, no.
And what's your current employment status?
I'm retired.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Do you know Teresa Sievers?
I did, yes.
And how did you know Dr. Sievers?
So I met her when I was in my surgical residency program. That was in Baltimore, Maryland. It was around 1995. She was a medical student who was doing rotations on surgical rotation. And so that's how we met. There was about a 3 to 4 month time frame back then where we were working together.
Was she Teresa Sievers back then?
No, she was Teresa Tottenham.
And did you become friends with Dr. Sievers at that point, or?
It was
Or-
mostly just, we were both in training, so we just hung out together on being trainees in surgery.
And at some point, you finished your surgical position up in,
Yes, in '97, I finished my surgical residency, and then we moved to Florida.
when you say we moved to Florida, who moved to
My
Florida?
wife and I and our son,
And what's your wife's name?
Michelle.
Michelle Petrites?
Michelle R. Wilcox Petrites.
She must be here in court. Okay, and so you and, can I say Mrs. Petrites?
Yes,
You and Mrs. Petrites moved to Florida with your son?
yes, in '97.
And did you have an opportunity to become reacquainted with Dr. Sievers after you moved to Florida?
Yes, it was years later. I think it was in 2007 or so. I was at the hospital doing rounds on my surgical patients, and she was sitting at one of the doctor's tables doing dictations and writing notes.
And after reacquainting with Dr. Sievers, did you, Dr. Sievers and Mrs. Petrites become friends?
Yes.
Well, let me ask you, what kind of friendship did you and Dr. Sievers have?
As time went on, we became close, family friends. We did things together, birthday parties, holiday parties, and we had a professional relationship as well. Her being a medical doctor, she would find problems that patients had, surgical problems, like a gallbladder problem or appendix, a hernia, and she would refer them to me. Likewise, I would have patients that didn't have physicians, and if they had conditions that I felt she could help with, I would refer to her.
So Dr. Sievers wasn't she was a different kind of doctor than you. She didn't do surgery?
Correct.
And how was the relationship between Dr. Sievers and Mrs. Petrites?
They were friends, close friends.
And now, what about Mr. Sievers? Were you and Mrs. Petrites friends with him as well?
In the context of being associated with Teresa and her family, yes.
So I'm guessing from your answer suggests that your association with Mr. Sievers was different than your association with Dr. Sievers.
Yes, definitely. Not
Sustained.
Okay. What difference, if any, was there between your association with Dr. Sievers and your association with Mr. Sievers?
We were much closer to Teresa than we were to Mr. Sievers.
And how long did the friendship between you and Mrs. Petrites and Dr. Sievers last?
So from the time that we had reconnected in 2007 up until the day of her demise.
And did you have the kind of friendship where Dr. Sievers might visit you at your home and you might visit her at her home?
Yes.
And when she visited at your home, did she bring her family with her?
Most of the time, yes, but she would come by herself sometimes.
And likewise, if you visited at her home, would you bring your family with you?
Yes.
Now, what was your relationship like, or rather, what was the relationship like between Dr. Petrites and Marc Sievers?
I was more of a association, I would say. We did not have a close relationship. We didn't go to watch a football game or hang out, have a beer. We didn't do any of those kind of things.
So if Dr. Sievers was visiting at your home with your family, or you were visiting at her home, you and Mr. Sievers didn't go and do guy things together?
No, we did not.
Did you and Mr. Sievers have the kind of relationship where you could call him and ask him for a favor, or he could call you and ask you for a favor?
Would depend upon the favor. I think I loaned him a dehumidifier once, and I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. So I would say no. It wasn't very. I wasn't very close to him.
Now, let me turn your attention specifically to Monday, June 29th, 2015, in the morning.
Okay.
At that time, in June of 2015, were you still a practicing surgeon?
Yes, I was.
And in general, what was your day? What were your Mondays like?
I had office days on Mondays to see to meet with new patients and have post-operative follow-ups, and on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays were operating days. I was in the operating room all day.
So were you working on Monday, June 29th?
Yes, I was.
And in the morning of June 29th, did you happen to receive any contact from Marc Sievers?
Yes, I did.
How did you receive that contact?
That morning, I was on my way into work, and I stopped at the post office to get the mail. My phone was in the car, and when I came out to the car, I noticed that there was a voicemail that was on. It was a voicemail from Marc, Mr. Sievers, asking me to go to the house and check on his wife.
And how far were you at the time, the post office you were at? How far was that post office from the Sievers home?
Less than 2 miles.
And so when you received the message from Mr. Sievers, did you then comply with his request and go to the home?
Yes, as I saw the message, I started playing it as I was starting up the vehicle and driving out. And as the initial parts were to go check on her, I just started heading that way. I completed listening to the message, and then I called him.
And when you called him, were you still at the post office? Were you at the home, or were you in transit between?
I was in transit to the home.
And when did you actually get to speak to him?
Yes, I did.
And what was the discussion like between you and Mr. Sievers while you drove over to the Sievers home?
So based on the voicemail that was left on my phone, he had said that she didn't show up for work, excuse me, that it wasn't like her, and just to go into the house and check on her. And so when I called him, I asked, what was going on, why is this, why are you calling me about this? And that conversation went on until I got to the house. It's only a couple of minutes drive, so it's not like it was a long conversation. He had wanted me to just go into the house and go check on her, and I didn't think that was appropriate, and I was telling him that I would knock on the door first before I would go into the house. So.
Okay, so when you told us earlier that sometimes the Sievers family visited the Petrites household, and sometimes the Petrites visited the Sievers household, did you have the kind of friendship where, the Sievers could just show up at your house and walk in?
No, we did not.
Or you show up at the Sievers house and just knock on the door and walk in?
No, we would knock on the door. Yes.
Wait to be answered?
Correct.
And so, did you have any concerns about not announcing your presence at the front door of the Sievers home?
Well, sure, of course. I wouldn't just walk into a house. I don't know what somebody's doing in the morning. I don't know if they're in the bathtub, shower, if they're exercising on a treadmill, or I don't know what somebody's doing. I'm not going to walk into somebody's house.
Did you also have any other concerns about walking into the house and surprising Dr. Sievers?
Sure. I know that there are weapons in the house. I know she had a gun, and I wouldn't walk into a house with someone who has a weapon.
So, when you got to the house, did you announce your presence at the home?
Well, I went to the front door, and I pounded on the front door, and there was no answer.
And were you still on the phone with Mr. Sievers while you were pounding on the front door, or had you hung up with him?
I had hung up with him as I was pulling into the driveway because I was at the house.
And after you pounded on the front door and didn't get an answer, what did you do?
And then I went to the garage door, the electronic garage door where you drive a car in, to go into the house.
And did you put up the garage door to go into the house?
Yes, and on the voicemail, he had left me a message and gave me the keypad code so that I could open the garage door, and I remembered what it was, and so I went in.
So, the Petrites family and the Sievers family didn't have the kind of friendship where you shared your alarm codes with one another?
No.
What about a spare set of house keys?
He had Mr. Sievers had a set of house keys to our house because it was probably a month or two beforehand. We had gone on a trip, and he came over to take care of our dogs.
But you didn't have a set of keys to the Sievers house?
No, I do not.
All right, so you said he'd given you the code to the door, and you put in the code and the door went up?
Correct.
What happened when the door went up?
I started to walk towards the entryway from the garage into the house, and one of the dogs, they had two dogs, and one of the dogs ran out into the driveway.
When you put up the door to walk into the house, is there a door that you have to go through to get from the garage into the main part of the house?
Yes, there is.
Was that door open or closed?
It was open.
That's how the dog was
That's how
able
the
to run
dog
out?
ran out. Yes, correct.
And were you able to see where the dog was going or why it was running out of the house?
Well, he ran down into the driveway, and I called back for him to shoo him back into the house, and I don't know where he went. Maybe he had to relieve himself. I don't know.
Okay, so now you're inside the garage. Did you make any efforts to make contact with Dr. Sievers from in the garage?
Well, as I was walking into the house, so I would say as I'm stepping into the step leading into the laundry room, which leads into the house, I was calling her name.
And did you get an answer?
There was no answer. No.
So did you get a chance to get into the house and try to figure out where she was?
After I took a couple of steps into the house, it was obvious where she was.
And why was it obvious?
She was dead on the floor in the kitchen.
You were able to see her?
Yes, I was.
Did you get a chance to, and I know I know that you're a doctor, but can you tell me how you were able to figure out at that point that Dr. Sievers was dead?
Well, there was a lot of blood on the floor in the kitchen, a big puddle around her body, and she had this massive head wound in the back of her head, and she was cold and lifeless.
And so you touched her body?
Yes, I did.
What was the purpose of touching her body?
To check for any signs of life.
And so despite the obvious trauma to her head, you still wanted to see if there were any vital signs?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Is the fact that she's cold to the touch a clue as to whether or not a person
Yeah, she was
expired?
She was expired for a while before I got there.
So after you discovered Dr. Sievers on the kitchen floor, what did you do?
Well, first I yelled into the house. I did not know if their daughters were at home with her. I did not know. I yelled for them. There was no response, and so I left the house. I went outside to call 911.
Okay. So when you spoke to Mr. Sievers before arriving at the house, the two of you didn't have any discussion about where his daughters were at that time?
Sustained.
When you spoke to Mr. Sievers, when you arrived at the house, did the two of you have any kind of a discussion about where his daughters were?
No, we did not. So the first thing I did when I left the house was I called Marc directly and asked him where the girls were. I did that before I called 911.
And what did he tell you?
He said that they were with him, and I told him that he needed to come home now, and that I would call him back.
Did you tell him why he needed to come home now?
No, I did not.
Did he ask you why he needed to come home now?
No, he did not.
Did you tell him what you'd seen in the house?
No, I did not.
And so you said you called 911. Why did you call 911?
There was a murder that I had found. And two reasons. One, to alert police as well. I did not know if the perpetrator, the person who did this, was still in the house or not. I did not know.
And let me take a step back and let's go back to when you made your entry into the garage.
Okay.
As you entered the garage, did you see anything on the garage floor as you walked into the house?
Well, I walked in between the two vehicles as they were parked side by side in the garage. And in order to get to the doorway leading into the house, I turned and walked in front of one of the vehicles. And there was a piece of luggage that was on the ground right in front of the vehicle.
Okay, so we'll fast forward back to 911. After you
Okay.
called 911, did they arrive?
Yes, they did.
And who was it that arrived first?
The paramedics, the fire guys came.
And did you tell the paramedics that you'd called?
Well, I was still on the phone with 911 when they had arrived, and we were kind of finishing up that, because I didn't know whether she wanted me to stay on the 911 operator, whether they wanted me to stay on the phone or not. So I just stayed on the phone with them, and as the fire guys were walking up to the house, I told them that she was dead.
And even though you told the fire guys that she was dead, did they go inside the house?
Yes, they did.
Okay. And at any point, did members of law enforcement arrive?
Yes, they did.
And did law enforcement start an investigation into what happened in that house?
Yes, they did.
Personal knowledge? Did law enforcement start an investigation into what happened inside that house?
Yes, they did. They asked me a couple questions. They put up the crime scene tape, and vehicles were there, several.
Did anybody investigate you and your vehicle?
Yes.
And during your time as an MD and as a surgeon, have you had opportunities? I won't say opportunities. Have you had, I guess, situations where you had to inform someone that a loved one had died or passed away?
Yes,
Is that something you've done before?
yes.
Did you have another opportunity to talk with Mr. Sievers about what had happened to Dr. Sievers in the house?
Yes, after I got off the phone with 911, I called Mr. Sievers to talk to him further about what had happened. I did not, the main premise behind that was to find out information because I knew that the police were going to be asking me, where was she, where was she coming home from, or whatever. And so I was asking Marc, Mr. Sievers, about her flight arrangement and things like that.
Did you tell him at that point that Dr. Sievers was deceased?
No, I did not.
Why not?
I didn't feel it was my duty or responsibility. I told him that something terrible had happened and that she was hurt. I didn't say what I found when I went in the house. I did not.
Is that something you would have done on the phone?
No.
That kind of news, when you told us earlier that you have had to deliver that kind of news, do you typically deliver it by phone?
No.
So during any conversation with Mr. Sievers that day, did he ask how his wife was hurt?
He didn't ask specifically, but he asked, was it a robbery? He didn't ask how she was hurt, where she was going to or be taken to.
That was going to be my next question. So, and I'll stop you and ask you the question. When you told Mr. Sievers that his wife was hurt, did he ask how she was hurt?
He asked in the context or in the questioning of, was this a robbery? Not, did she fall? Did she break a leg? Did she bump her head or something?
Did he ask if you were able to get some help for whatever his wife's injuries were?
Well, I told him that the paramedics were there.
So knowing that the paramedics were there, did he ask if she was going to the hospital and which one?
No, he did not.
And just for the record, is the person you've referred to as Marc Sievers present in court today?
Yes, he is.
Can you please point to Marc Sievers and identify him by an article of clothing he's wearing?
He's in the defense table. He's sitting in the middle. He's wearing a gray jacket and a striped tie.
May the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant.
We'll let the record so reflect.
And the home where you found Dr. Sievers deceased, is that in Lee County?
Yes, it is.
I want to show you, Madam Clerk, what's been previously identified as entered as State's Exhibit Number 1. I'm going to show you what's been entered as Exhibit 1.
Thank you. Yes.
And who's that in Exhibit 1?
This is Teresa Sievers.
And is that the same person you found on the floor in the kitchen at the Sievers home?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so after Dr. Sievers was discovered deceased, after you discovered her deceased, did the amount of contact, if any, between you and Mr. Sievers change?
Yes, it did, very much so.
How did it change?
So beforehand, before I found her, we had a very, I want to say, a casual relationship. It was by association only that he was associated with her, that we had contacts with him. Afterwards, things had changed. I became, or we had more frequent conversations because my wife and I, we were close to the family. They have children, and we were just as much in shock as everybody else about what was happening, to their family, how their children were going to be, and how Mr. Sievers was going to be. And so, yes, I had much more frequent contacts with him, more so in the subsequent months after her murder than I had in the previous 8 or 9 years that I knew them.
So on the weekend, immediately prior to Monday the 29th,
Yes.
did you get any other phone calls or voice messages from Marc Sievers?
Yes, the night before I found her, which would have been a Sunday night, I got a voicemail message from him saying that he was checking in on me for some reason, and wanted to know that if I was okay, and that Teresa was going to be coming home that night. And
Was that on something that Mr. Sievers frequently did? Did he frequently call to check on you and see how
No.
you were doing?
no, we never really had much conversation about travel plans and things like that. We didn't have that kind of relationship.
So how would you describe the fact that he called and left you this message the night before, checking on you? How would you describe that?
It was very odd, just very strange that he did.
I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as States 28. And if you could examine States 28 and tell me what it is.
This looks like a CD-ROM of a voice messages that had come from Mr. Sievers to my phone.
And the two voicemail messages that we just talked about, are they on that disc?
Yes, the one before, the night before I found her, and the morning that I found her.
And are the messages that are on that disc the actual messages that Mr. Sievers left for you on your phone?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, this time the state would admit what's been previously marked as States 28 and evidence of States 28. Objection.
We'll show them admitted.
Teresa comes back tonight, and then the girls and I will be back on Wednesday night. Just wanted to say hello and see how you're doing. Take care, Mark. Bye.
Did everybody hear that?
Can you play it again, and maybe a little louder if possible? Can you hear me, Mike?
It's not plugged in. Oh, that? Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Mark. This is also Mark. I'm just calling to check on you, see how you're doing. I was texting texting with Michelle, and she said you already made it back safely. And for Myers, I just wanted to... Anyway, you got the idea. I will talk to you later. Teresa comes back tonight, and then the girls and I will be back on Wednesday night. Just wanted to say hello and see how you're doing. Take care, Mark. Bye.
And for the record, Your Honor, that was a 385 kilobyte file on the disk. There are two files here. I'll play the second file, which is the 835 kilobyte file.
Hey, Mark. This is Mark. I called yesterday just to check on you. Now I'm calling you today to see if you can check on Teresa. I know it's early, 9:30 in the morning, and you're probably at work, and that's okay. Teresa's not at work yet, and the office is calling and texting, and we can't get through to Teresa. So I just thought maybe if you were not at work, you could possibly swing by the house. And the garage code is 1313, enter, and then the door opens up. Anyway, if you get this message, great. Otherwise, I'll call my mom to have her come over and check on Teresa. Maybe she's just sound asleep. It's just not like her. You know, in all the years I've known her to be a half hour late for work and not answer her phone. All right. Actually, it's an answer to the phone, which is kind of normal for me, but not being late for work. All right. I'm rambling. I'll talk to you. Thanks, Mark.
Were all the jurors able to hear that? Okay. You play it a little bit louder. I think you missed the first part of it.
Replay both messages, Your Honor?
Just the second one, I saw confused looks on the second one like we did on the first one, so I thought I'd ask again, and there actually, some jurors are nodding to that, so I think the second one's sufficient.
Okay.
Hey, Mark. This is Mark. I called yesterday just to check on you. Now I'm calling you today to see if you can check on Teresa. I know it's early, 9:30 in the morning, and you're probably at work, and that's okay. Teresa's not at work yet, and the office is calling and texting, and we can't get through to Teresa. So I just thought maybe if you were not at work, you could possibly swing by the house. And the garage code is 1313, enter, and then the door opens up. Anyway, if you get this message, great. Otherwise, I'll call my mom to have her come over and check on Teresa. Maybe she's just sound asleep. It's just not like her. You know, in all the years I've known her to be a half hour late for work and not answer her phone. All right. Actually, it's an answer to the phone, which is kind of normal for me, but not being late for work. All right. I'm rambling. I'll talk to you. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, Dr. Petrites.
Yes.
During your discussions with Mr. Sievers, did he indicate to you at all how he knew Dr. Sievers was home?
Yes, so when I was driving to their house, we were talking on the phone, and he had told me that he had traced the phone to the house, that he knew that she was there. He went on to say that he didn't know why she wasn't answering because the phone was dead. We had we engaged in conversation about that because I said, how can you find a phone when the phone is dead? But he said he knew that she was in the house, and for me, he wanted me to just go in.
Okay, so you told us before we played the audio that your contact with Mr. Sievers increased after Dr. Sievers was killed.
Correct.
At any point, did you become aware of whether or not a suspect was arrested in this case?
Yes, as time went on and suspects were arrested, yes, of course.
And did you know who the suspects were who were arrested?
One of them, I knew the name, but the other one I did not know.
And which one did you know, or name did you know?
Curtis Wright,
How did you know Curtis Wright's name?
because through discussions with the Sievers family about, or Mark and Teresa, about that he was his best friend from way back when.
And so when you heard that Mr. Sievers' best friend was arrested for killing your friend, Dr. Sievers, did you have a discussion with Mr. Sievers about that?
Yes, I did.
How would you describe first of all, how would you describe the tone of the discussion?
Well, I guess I was angry that his friend was arrested for it. I called him and asked him about it, and the response was that, oh, he didn't do it. They don't have any evidence on him. They're picking away at my friends, trying to get to me. Which I still cannot figure out why you wouldn't be mad if somebody was arrested for killing your wife.
So you were, were you surprised at his response?
Yes, I was, very much so.
And now, did you have any knowledge about whether or not there was any kind of a business relationship as well between Mr. Wright and the Sievers medical practice?
Yes, I knew that he had done some computer IT work for them.
And after Mr. Wright was arrested, did you and Mr. Sievers also have a discussion about Mr. Wright's continued employment with the medical practice?
Yes, we did. So I had, in one of the few times that I had a personal face-to-face encounter with Mr. Sievers, we were at a function, the girls were having in a play, and he started talking to me about that with Curtis being in prison, that he couldn't get into his computers at the office, and this was months after the fact. And he was telling me that he wanted the jail to give Curtis access to the computer so he could get into Teresa's computer system, which I thought was very bizarre.
Was the medical office still open at this time?
I do not know exactly what day that the doors were finally closed. I do not know. That encounter with him was in October of 2015. I don't know if the practice had completely shut doors, locked doors yet.
And even after the doors to the medical practice were closed, did Mr. Sievers continue to do things to wind up the affairs at the medical practice?
Yes, yes. I guess I would say, you know, I knew these things because in our conversations that I had with Mr. Sievers, I would always start off our conversation with saying, well, how are the girls? First things first. How is the family? How is that going on? Their mother was murdered. The next thing I'd ask was, you know, what's going on with her practice? What's going on with her patients? Because patients, they have sensitive and important medical information, you know, within the walls of her office that either need to be, you know, relayed, transferred to another doctor, or accessed by them. And then I would ask Mark about Mr. Sievers, about what he was doing for himself, because I can't imagine what it would be like to have your spouse be brutally murdered like that.
Now, when you were a practicing surgeon, did you practice as part of your own, did you have your own medical practice, or were you part of like a hospital or something?
No, I was a solo practitioner. So I did major operations out of the hospitals, and smaller operations at outpatient surgery center, but I was a solo practitioner.
So you had some experience running a medical practice?
Yes.
Your Honor, we tender the witness.
Defense.
Good afternoon, Dr. Petrites.
Afternoon.
A couple things. First, you were the first person to enter the home to your knowledge on June 29th, 2015. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
When you walked through the garage, through the laundry room, did you move or disturb anything?
No, I did not.
Okay. In fact, you were very careful not to touch any of the things. You said you saw a hammer lying by Dr. Sievers. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
You didn't touch that, correct?
No, I did not.
You saw where a dog bowl had been kind of kicked over and was in the middle of the entranceway, correct?
Yes.
You didn't touch that, right?
No.
And you said you touched Dr. Sievers' body, but that was only to ascertain whether or not her body was cold, if her body temperature had fallen.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
You said you and your wife Michelle were close with the Sievers. Is that correct?
Correct.
Was there anything that you believed Mr. Sievers may have done that would give you the inference that he wished death upon his wife?
Objection, cause for speculation.
Sustained.
You've given several stories to police now, is that correct? Several interviews?
With police?
Yes.
So on the day of when I found her, yes, I gave a statement to the police.
Okay. So you gave the statement on the day you found her, which would have been June 29th,
June
2015,
29th.
correct?
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you, you've had your deposition taken 2 times, is that correct, sir? Or 3 times now?
3 times, yes.
Objection, relevance.
Overruled for now.
The date of your first deposition was in February of 2017. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And 2 days later after that deposition, you reached back out to law enforcement because you had additional information for them, correct?
No, sir, it was the following day.
It was the following day. Okay,
Correct.
the following day, you reached out because of the voice messages.
Correct. I did not have my phone with me when we had our the first deposition, and I didn't know how relevant that these voice messages were.
Okay. And so, you would then have another deposition in year 2018, is that correct? Or I'm sorry, no, it was February 2019. It was February 2019.
February 2019.
February 2019,
Yes, sir.
you had another deposition.
Yes.
But it wasn't until September of 2019 that you alerted anyone from the state attorney's office or law enforcement office about these conversations that you had with Mr. Sievers, correct?
Correct.
So, was September of 2019. That was the first time where we heard that Mr. Sievers was defending Curtis Wainwright. Is that correct?
Objection to the form of the question.
Overruled.
The first time we heard that you had a conversation with Mr. Sievers in which he was defending Curtis Wainwright after his arrest was in September of 2019, correct?
Correct.
The first time you told someone from law enforcement or the state attorney's office that Mr. Sievers wanted the jail to allow computer access was in September of 2019, is that correct?
Correct.
You would agree with me, these are pretty damning statements, correct?
Objection calls for a conclusion on the part of the witness.
Sustained.
Do you think these conversations were important, sir?
Objection calls for speculation on the part of the witness.
Sustained.
Is there a reason you chose to wait until September of 2019 to disclose these conversations to the state attorney's office and/or law enforcement?
Is there a reason why?
Is there a reason?
Well, I was never asked any of these things. I came to my other depositions. It never came up.
And so, rather than address this with the state attorney's office or law enforcement, you just chose to remain silent on this issue, is that correct?
Well, I'll say again, I didn't know the relevance of things. It just came up during the preparation for the co-defendant's trial about what would be talked about during the trial. And it was my inquiry of, are these things ever going to come up? And is it important? I didn't know. And so that's how that had come about, yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. Nothing further.
State.
Dr. Petrites,
Yes, sir.
do you know the rules of criminal discovery?
Objection, Your Honor. Proper.
Not if he knows, that's not improper.
Overruled.
Do you know
Do I-
the criminal rules of discovery?
I'm a doctor, not a lawyer. No, I do not.
Prior to your discussion with the state in September of 2019, did you have any understanding about why these disclosures needed to be made before trial?
No, I did not, sir.
Do you have that understanding now?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Hunter just asked you if you had knowledge of the rules of criminal procedure, right?
Correct.
Do you have a basic knowledge that if you don't tell someone something, they're not going to know it?
I don't understand what you mean. What?
Would you say it's fair to say that if you don't provide information to someone, they're not going to have that information?
It would depend upon what it is that you're talking about, yes.
Well, let's
Okay.
address these statements specifically.
Okay,
You never provided these statements to Mr. Hunter or Ms. Ross, correct?
Objection to the form of the question.
Sustained.
Prior to 2019, September of 2019, you never
Yes, sir.
provided the statements that you addressed specifically about your conversations with Mr. Sievers to Mr. Hunter or Ms. Ross, correct?
correct.
And accordingly, they would have no way of knowing about these statements, correct?
Correct.
Thank you, nothing further.
Nothing further.
Is this witness to be retained or released?
He's released by the state.
Retained, Your Honor.
Doctor, you're subject to recall. We'll let you know if you need it again. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, thank you.
Next witness.
State calls, Adam Hughes.
you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your full name for the record?
Adam Lucas Hughes.
And Mr. Hughes, I see you're wearing a uniform and a badge. Can you tell us where you're employed, sir?
I'm a lieutenant paramedic at Bonita Springs Fire Control and Rescue District.
Okay. And were you employed as a medic on June 29th of 2015?
Yes, sir.
And on that day, did you become involved in an investigation at 27034 Jarvis Road in Bonita Springs?
Yes, sir.
How was it that you became involved there?
We were at the Station 21, which is located in that district. We received a tone for a cardiac arrest, and we responded to the address.
Well, we don't have any medical training, so what does cardiac arrest mean?
A cardiac arrest is that the heart is no longer beating on its own.
So if a medical person says cardiac arrest, that means that the heart has stopped?
Yes, sir.
And did you have an opportunity to respond to the scene?
Yes, sir.
How long after you got the call did it take for you to get there?
It's relatively clear. It's within 2 miles of the district, I'd say, or the station, so probably between 3 and 4 minutes.
And what kind of vehicle did you use to get there?
A fire truck, a Pierce fire truck.
And I'm guessing since you had a cardiac arrest call, did you turn on all the lights and sounds on the fire truck?
Yes,
to
sir.
get
We
there?
responded lights and sirens.
And did you actually arrive at the scene?
Yes, sir.
Was there anybody at the scene when you got there?
Yes, sir. There was a gentleman in the driveway talking on a cell phone when we arrived on scene.
And did you have an opportunity when you saw the man in the driveway on the phone to try to figure out where the cardiac arrest was?
As we got off, we approached the gentleman, and he was on the phone talking to someone, whether it be dispatch or who it was, and I heard him say, "The firefighters are here." We questioned him. We asked if she was alive or if she was viable, and he was very flustered and didn't really give us a secure answer, so we entered the home.
And how did you enter the home?
We entered the home through the garage on the left-hand side.
Okay. And the garage door was up?
Yes, sir.
And as you entered the garage door on the left-hand side, was there anything on the floor of the garage?
Acting Lieutenant Mendez was in first place, and I saw him scoot like a carry-on suitcase out of the way. It seemed to be impeding the progress to the door.
Okay. And so you didn't, when you entered the home, you didn't enter by yourself.
No, sir.
You and Lieutenant Mendez, did anybody else go in?
Yes, sir.
Who?
Firefighter Coburn.
Okay. And you said Mr. Mendez was in the first position,
Yes, sir.
and which position were you in?
I was in the number 2 position.
And then Mr. Coburn was in the third position?
Yes, sir.
So you gentlemen kind of walked in a straight line?
Yes, sir.
And did you have an opportunity to make contact with the cardiac arrest patient?
As we opened the door, we came straight through, and the patient was down on the ground right as you came through the door into the kitchen.
And now, when you get called out to a cardiac arrest, do you take any life-saving equipment with you?
Yes, sir. We take our cardiac monitor, a Zoll monitor. We take our med bag. We take our airway bag, and we take a suction unit.
And are these devices that you use to try to render first aid to a person who's suffering from cardiac arrest?
Yes, sir.
And so, did you make contact with the victim in the home?
As we entered, we saw the victim laying on the ground. We got to the threshold of the laundry room, and we witnessed the patient down on the ground, and we witnessed injuries incompatible with life.
And when you saw the injuries that were incompatible with life, were you able to deploy any of your life-saving equipment to try and save her life?
No, sir.
No way it would have happened.
No, sir.
Did you touch the body?
No, sir.
Did you walk around the house at all?
No, sir.
What did you do after you got to, you said you got to the threshold and you saw the injuries. What did you do then?
We turned around and exited the house.
Okay. And did any law enforcement arrive?
As we exited, we waited at the end of the driveway, and eventually, after a minute, 2, 3, some law enforcement arrived.
Lieutenant, the witness.
Good afternoon, Mr. Hughes.
Hello, sir.
You said Acting Lieutenant Mendez
Yes, sir.
moved the luggage, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Other than that, did your paramedic team touch or disturb anything else in the garage or the laundry room?
No, sir. We entered the doorway, and we did not break the threshold of the laundry room, from the laundry room to the kitchen.
Okay, so you went into the laundry room a little bit, you assessed the situation, you turned around, you went back out.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further.
State.
Nothing further from the state.
This witness to be retained or released.
He's released by the state.
Release from defense.
You're free to go. Thank you, sir. Next witness.
State calls John Armato.
Sir, stand right there, face the floor, raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Can I ask Madam Clerk's assistance with Exhibit 27, please? Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your full name for the record?
Jonathan Armato,
And can you spell your last name for the court reporter?
Armato,
And where are you employed, sir?
the Lee County Sheriff's Office.
And what capacity?
Currently, I'm a sergeant
And as a sergeant at the Lee County Sheriff's Office, what are your duties?
to supervise my span of control.
And do you supervise road patrol or some other division in the sheriff's office?
Currently, I'm in the civil division.
And what are the duties of the civil division?
I serve subpoenas, court orders, evictions, things of that nature.
And what were your duties back in June of 2015?
I was a detective with the Major Crimes Unit.
Okay, and as a detective in a major crimes division, what were your duties then?
To investigate violent crimes.
And did you do these investigations by yourself or as part of a team?
That was typically done as a team.
Did you become involved in an investigation of a homicide that occurred at 27034 Jarvis Road in Bonita Springs?
I did.
And what was your involvement in that investigation?
I had a very minimal involvement. I conducted a couple of interviews and obtained a DNA buccal swab from Bonnie Sievers.
And what was the purpose of obtaining a DNA buccal swab from Bonnie Sievers?
It was known at the time that Bonnie had access to the house while they were on vacation to watch the animals. So they would use the DNA results from her buccal swab to compare to any unknown biological evidence that may have been obtained at the scene for elimination purposes.
No, Bonnie Sievers, she wasn't a suspect in the case, was she?
No.
And so when you conduct a violent crime investigation, do you often obtain DNA swabs from people who aren't a suspect in the crime?
Yes.
Why?
For elimination purposes, because the crime scene technicians are going to be swabbing the crime scene for fingerprints, DNA, things of that nature. So when they send that off to the lab as pretty much an unknown at the time, if we have a sample that it can be compared to, then it's either submitted as evidence or eliminated.
So sometimes if if a person's had contact with a crime scene, their DNA hits on the crime scene, you might want to have or if there's like you said, an unknown sample, you might want to submit their sample to see if it's theirs.
Correct.
All right. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit number 27. And ask if you recognize number 27.
I do.
What is it?
It's a package containing the DNA buccal swab from Bonnie Sievers.
And is that a buccal swab you obtained?
Yes.
How did you obtain it?
DNA buccal swabs are taken from what it looks like an elongated Q-tip, and you swab the inside portion of a person's cheek to obtain a DNA sample.
And then what do you do with the elongated Q-tip after you swab the cheek?
It goes into an issued box, which then gets put into a paper bag.
And at this time, Your Honor, the State would admit what's been previously identified as State's Exhibit number 27 in evidence of State's 27.
No objection.
Should admitted.
Contender the witness.
Defense.
No question.
Is this witness to be released or retained?
Released by the State.
Release from defense.
Thank you, Deputy. You're free to go.
Thank you, sir.
Next witness.
Your Honor, the next witness the state is calling is Michael Downs. I asked the clerk over lunch to pull all the exhibits the state will be using and ask the court for maybe 5 minutes so they can be examined by defense counsel before we begin.
Good opportunity to let everyone use the restroom, I suppose. Please don't talk about the case among yourselves or with anybody else or look up any of the people or places involved. We'll be with you shortly. Please be seated. Just let me know when everyone's ready, 5 minutes or whatever you need.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll be in recess.